The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Ruth and Oliver Stanton About Women lecture series. My name is Susan Engel, and I direct the Adult Division in the Charles Simon Center for Adult Life and Learning, and I'm so glad to see so many of you with us for this very special occasion. Tonight's topic, as you know, is sexual expression and society. And our guest is someone who probably has more to say than almost anybody on that subject. She is the author and editor of more than a dozen books, including the Best American Erotica series and The Sexual State of the Union. She has written for Esquire, for Playboy, for The Village Voice, and also for the New York Times Book Review. She's also a regular columnist for the online magazine called Salon. Her most recent book, and the focus of her talk tonight, is Full Exposure, Opening Up to Your Sexual Creativity and Erotic Expression. After her talk, there will be ample time for your questions, followed by a book selling and signing right outside this hall. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me for a very warm welcome to Susie Bright.
Oh, thank you for coming tonight. I think I need to raise this up. Maybe I'll take the mic out. There, that's better, isn't it? It's really good to see you tonight, although I wish I could see you a little bit more clearly. Is there any way to raise the house lights just a little bit? It's exciting to be in the spotlight, but then you want to see who's in the audience as well. This is my last event on a book tour that began on Labor Day. I began with a very big scheme to drive up the West Coast. I actually wanted to start at the Tijuana border and go all the way to Anchorage. That was my big dream. I had plans of buying a giant hippie school bus. I mean, I just was enamored with the Merry Prankster idea, and that I would put ecstasy or bust, perhaps, would be my slogan. And then, I would stop at lots of little towns all the way along. But it turned out to be difficult to buy a hippie school bus these days. You just can't whip one up when you need one. And I ended up in a Ford Windstar. I just pray that Kesey doesn't find out about this, because it just wasn't the artistic statement I wanted. But I did go to lots of little towns throughout California and the Northwest, and then I began my Midwestern and East Coast tour. It's, I hope you'll allow me a little bit. I already am sort of thinking, what is my nostalgia? What did I learn from this tour so far? I was alone for so long writing this book, my 14th book on the topic of sexuality. And of course, when I was wondering it the whole time, I thought, what will people think of this? This is different for me. So many people had said, okay, it's your 14th book. Did you forget some little detail in number 13 that you need to expound on? And yet, for those of you who've seen this new book, it's very different from me. I've usually written very much close to the political sexual issues that were on the front page. I love that. I'm passionate about that. And many of the articles you see in my columns or my freelance writing come from that perspective. And yet, so often, I had been asked by people, why do you feel as comfortable as you do talking about sex? How does it come so easy to you? Who were you raised by? People searching for some sort of psychological answer to my eccentricity. And yet, of course, I knew that I was just as timid and shy and embarrassed and awkward about sex, probably more so than most people growing up, and that what's happened to me over the last 20 years has been, I don't know, a certain search for justice, and also this need to articulate my sexual philosophy. And this is what this book became, Full Exposure, was I wanted to talk about some of the more timeless issues of sexuality that have always haunted me. I think they're cradle to the grave. I mean, they're not issues that can be discussed easily in a few words on a front page article or in a political debate. How do you have a quick punchline answer to things like loneliness or yearning or feeling the extent of your desire and the depth of your sexual imagination? How do you talk about being a sexual person inside your family, in your relationships as a daughter, mother, sister, brother, father? I wanted to talk about those things, the things that didn't have quickie 1-2 punch expression at the end of them. And I thought maybe this can be the thrust of the book, is asking my readers, what is your sexual philosophy? I asked my one of the classes I teach earlier this winter. It was one of the assignments I gave my students. I said, I want you to, this week's assignment, write down your sexual philosophy. I know you have one, even if you haven't expressed it yet, but I want you to tell me who you believe you are sexually, what motivates you, what is compelling to you, what you would do even if it made you go blind, and where you'll never go, where you draw your line in the sand, your attraction to the truth or to secrecy. Just tell it, go ahead. And of course everyone said, but it's hard, And I was like, yes, but I think it'll be quite illuminating to put some of these things down. I even got an email from one student who said, Susie, I love you, but I can't do this assignment. You see, I hate sex, and I am never going to have sex again. Signed, Jessie, 19 years old. And of course, that just inflamed me even further. I said, dear Jessie, you hate sex? That's a sexual philosophy. Can't wait to hear 500 more words about it. And I learned a lot. Those students were so influential for writing this book, because I think they did appreciate the notion of being candid, that being candid was the first, was the beginning of having an honest sexual discussion. So many times we've become accustomed to the pundits and politicians and so on saying, sex is everywhere. It's just in our face. It's just too much. It's just, it's coated everything like some obnoxious sugar you can't get out of your drink. And yet, when I hear those kind of complaints, I feel bewildered, because I don't see any sex on television or in Hollywood movies. And I don't mean that I'm not seeing some sort of National Geographic special with 2 naked humans having intercourse. I don't simply mean that. I mean, I don't see any candid or complicated, honest, vulnerable expression of sexuality on any level in the mainstream media. What I do see is tremendous and quite perverse titillation. And by titillation, I mean, I think the old-fashioned sense of titillation was when somebody says, come here, I've got something to show you. And there's the promise that if you come close, you will be shown something. But nowadays, you're urged in that same salacious way to come closer and get a quick look. But then when you get there, bang, you get slapped, and you have to ante up. I mean, what is called sex in entertainment today is actually retail shock therapy, where you are encouraged to come close, and then you are given a rude buzz and told, oh, I'm sorry, this will require more cash and more improvement on your part, and there's someplace else you need to go. So I don't see sex on television. I see a kind of titillation as material anxiety on a level that I've never seen before. And if there was, gee, I'd love it. There should be a TV program called Your Sexual Philosophy. That would be great. And every week, it would be so shocking to have people come on and just sort of talk about what they've learned about themselves so far and where they think they're at. That would be the opposite of anything I see in the media these days. I've been getting a lot of reinforcement for some of these ideas. I find that people want to discuss their sexual point of view. They have come to the complete end of their rope with labels. You know, the nouns have just sort of done themselves in, and now it requires verbs and adjectives, and maybe even using your hands to explain what you understand about yourself sexually. I see people who, when it comes to their family, rather than the message that one would think America is obsessed with, which is, you know, wrap up your children in a big blanket and hide them in a closet. And I don't know, at 30 you sort of push them out in the world and then they're supposed to know how to have sex. That seems to be the climate with young people these days. Their sexuality is completely fetishized. They either have to be sexual victims or sexual monsters, or else they're on the pedestal as the vision of everything that is beautiful or desirable, but don't desire them too much, or we go back to the victim and monster paradigm again. That's a very unhappy place for young people to be sexually. And I meet parents like myself a lot on this tour. In fact, many of them brought their kids to my events, which was really poignant to me. They would say, here's my daughter Mary, I've given her all your books, and I told her, honey, just read this and explain everything. I was like, wow, I wasn't even trying to do the Susie Dr. Spock book yet. Yet I understand that they feel a comradeship with me in that they want their children to have a wonderful, fulfilling sex life, and they want them to accept themselves. They don't want them to be terrorized about their bodies, about their fantasies. They want them to treasure their sexuality and treasure their erotic feelings as something that will be kind of artistic and healthy guardian with them the rest of their life. I mean, that would be I share that sensibility entirely, and I know what it's like to feel like you're carving out the path all by yourself. It's brand new. I mean, my daughter is such a different point of view about sex than I did as a child, and people say, oh, what did you do? What did you do? Did you put on a show? Did you give her a lecture? I mean, it's nothing nearly as elaborate as that. It's just simple things, like, for example, she doesn't have a concept of sin. I mean, that was the first thing I could have told you about sex when I was her age, was sin, and how hot you were going to burn if you indulged in it. The fact that she knows the name of every part of her body from her elbow to her clitoris, and she doesn't feel any particular ugliness or furtiveness about one or the other. That's remarkable to me. That's certainly not how I felt. I didn't know the names for anything between my waist and my knees until I was 15 years older than she is now. Those things are encouraging to me, and I meet other parents at her school who I see, rather than finding, us to be pariahs, they're in the same boat. They're looking for some of the same answers. This tour has been wonderful for me. Probably the only thing that's been a little strange is sometimes I'm not prepared for how my ideas about sexual liberation and sexual creativity have actually affected so many people's lives that I don't know. I was invited to someone's house the other day, who comes from a very different world and milieu than me, and I noticed that next to his bed he had a little box with Hitachi magic wand, probably the vibrator I've done more to popularize than any other product. Not because I was a spokeswoman, but just because inadvertently I did so much for vibrators in the world. They had just the sort of condom I've always talked about, and just the sort of lubricant I've always talked about, and a few books on the shelf, and I thought, my God, it's the Susie Bright kit. And now here I am, the real me, with this new friend, and then the Susie Bright persona. Like, who's that? It was sort of, one hand kind of oddly flattering, and on the other hand, I thought, what have I wrought? Or am I completely pleased with this? Or a little bit of, when do I get away from that Susie Bright? This book, in a sense, was a way for me to insert a little bit more of my own vulnerability. I wanted so much to tell people the equivalent of, look, I can be as bad in bed as anybody. I wanted to talk about my own fear and how I've considered it. I don't do the things I do because I think I'm the greatest lover. I just have always been attracted to thinking about sex critically. I don't mean that negatively, but to thinking all about it. I can't help it. It's why I never get sick of it. People say, well, haven't you yearned to have a chance to write about something else, to talk about something else? But I haven't found it to be a narrow description. I don't just sit around writing maps of how to find the G-spot over and over again. I get so many more interesting questions that to me are about humanity. And I'm never going to get sick of that. I'm never going to get sick of talking about intimacy. I'm never going to get sick of talking about an erotic vision. I'm never going to get burnt out on what it means to take on a sexual consciousness that maybe threatens every institution there is. I'm never going to be tedious with that. Well, I'd like to find out a lot more about what you're interested in, because who knows if I've been touching on some of those topics or not. I did want to, I wonder if I can find it. That's in my, there's a paragraph I had that was my theme for tonight. This book that says, opening up to your sexual creativity. Well, I knew I wasn't the first person to write a book on this topic. It's just that so often it seems like there's technique manuals, sexual technique manuals, which I think are just the biggest con. I just feel so awful for people, and I always did, even when I worked at the Feminist vibrator store, the people who would want to come in and buy the equivalent of the Spanish fly or the Benoit ball or the magic pill, the magic instruction manual that would guide them to have the perfect sex and the perfect lover. Oh, how exciting. What's that? I know how starved we are for just the most basic, simple, physical sex information. But I resented the way that information has been exploited as some great secret that you must pay for or that only a few can know. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there have been books that want so badly to have respect for sexuality in every sphere of life. And they feel that in order to get respect, they must keep their tone on either an academic or an ethereal level. In other words, in order to write about sex and be respected, they have to take the fuck out of it. They just sort of have to take the bad words and the earthiness and the sweatiness and the craziness of sex. Please take away the craziness. Well, this was my attempt to to write something that had it all, because sex could be soulful, and it could be rolling in the mud all at the same time. I mean, who doesn't know that? Who hasn't lived a little while? It has all the elements of high and low. Real sex doesn't have sex distinctions and the gender distinctions that we've so often attributed to it, but that doesn't get said too much. As I was saying here, it's not an original idea that sex and creativity are connected, or that sexual inspiration opens a path of consciousness and strength that might otherwise be elusive. It's just that we don't always find enlightenment at the end of our sexual pursuits. At the end of every sexual seeker's journey, there sometimes seems to be an erotic whoopee cushion, the indignity and humiliation of a lustful quest gone wrong. How many times have we shaken our heads at our folly? How often does a sexual high come down like a bad acid hangover? I thought I saw God, but it was really a pimple on my ass. And that, this really bothered me when I was sort of a young pro-sex activist. I thought, well, once you have the information, once you've seen the light, doesn't it give you the perfect opportunity to revise your worldview with a great deal more sense of tolerance and a more justice-minded approach towards everything and everyone? And I would get really mad when I would meet someone who was, I guess you'd call them a libertine, or maybe a libertarian, someone who had very open views about sexuality, but it didn't seem to have affected any of their other social or political considerations. I thought, how can that be? And I would complain about this to a good friend of mine, and I remember she said to me, but it isn't an instant ticket, is it? It's just a remarkable opportunity if you take it. And I thought that was true. I mean, I did take it. I did take that ticket, and I said, yes, put me on the roller coaster. I want to go where this goes, even though I'm a little afraid, but I think it'll be worth it. And so far it has. So tell me a little bit about why you came tonight, or things you've been thinking about my work and about sexuality and in general, my sex life, your sex life. People told me, no, I'm quite serious. I'm going to bring my chair closer to this edge of the stage. Oh, I know you're not shy. You can't possibly be shy. Yes, the woman right there.
I don't have kids, but I have nephews and nieces who are in their teens. And they're at the stage where they're bringing boyfriends and girlfriends home. And there's a lot of discussions by the parents about, when is it okay for them to sleep with their partner, or you tell them what kind of advice. And I'm just wondering, as a mother, what your advice would be in that area.
Well, first I'll tell you, as a daughter, what I was the most grateful for when I began my sexual life was right around my 16th birthday. I should say my sexual life with other people. I'm all for letting your kids know early on that the solo sexual life is a wonderful way to go. You don't necessarily have to have anybody over to your room. But my parents were some of the first people I told that I was being sexual. I was very much wanted to tell them. I was very excited and proud of myself, and I wanted their approval, and I guess I knew enough that I would get it. Not in the sense that they, put on their cheerleading outfits and pom-poms, but in the sense that, I had questions about what was going to happen next. I was excited, but I was worried. I had a lot of things, and I'm so glad I felt like I could talk to my family about anything. without, that sort of, so many people are afraid of being disinherited or physically punished, or just the sort of the house caving in. Interestingly, your home, the parent's home, is the safest place that your kids could possibly have sex with anyone else. I mean, I would much rather my daughter was spending the night with her sweetheart in my house and having, oatmeal with us the next morning or whatever it was, than wondering where they could find privacy or a safe place to be, in what? The car, the playground. I mean, there's all the old-fashioned romance of, making out at the drive-in, but there's no drive-ins left. I live next to like one of the last drive-ins in America, and I'm always telling my partner, we must go to the drive-in more often because they're going to close this, and then it'll be like the dinosaur. We'll be one of the last people who were there. So I don't know, there's a few, these are, radical notions. Most people are trying to stop their kids from having sex any place at all. Or they feel like if it's in my house, isn't that a special kind of condoning? I think it's a special kind of protection and a sense of you being there for them that made me feel a lot more secure. I never felt afraid. Yeah.
I have two children in their 20s, and I think it's a fine line between making it safe and being intrusive, because I think sex of all things is what children have to own by themselves. It's it's not up to mommy and daddy to control. And they try very, very much. I mean, I think that's, you really have to pay attention and try not to push it on a child who isn't ready. I have one who is extremely reticent and one who is extremely forthcoming. So, I mean, I think you have to be careful.
Yes, a lot of people have talked to me about kids at younger ages. What can I do? What would be a good idea? And one of the things I think is most important is creating an idea that privacy is important to both them and to you. And that privacy isn't necessarily just for sex. It could be for anything, for lying alone and daydreaming, or reading a book, or just, being in your room or your little corner without somebody thinking they could just come in and investigate you and interrogate you on what you're up to. I really appreciate that my daughter respects my privacy and that she can expect a certain kind of respect for hers, even though she's very little and she doesn't have, it's not quite as elaborate or confident as it will be when she grows older. When you tell your story, one thing that reminds me, and I don't know how this is going to happen with my daughter, but I have some very well-meaning feminist friends who wanted to celebrate their daughter's first menstrual period with a wonderful feminist menstruation party, with red balloons and poems and, like sort of this grand display. And the entire thing backfired. Her daughter was so angry at her. She didn't want to, she didn't like that this, event planning had gone on. Because of her mother's, really sort of vicarious need to have attention for something that she hadn't had the kind of attention she wanted. You sort of wish, well, Mom, why don't you have some sort of perimenopause party yourself and, let me do this my way. I've broached this a little bit with my daughter because I do want her to know a little bit more about menstruation than I did. For my mother, it was a big deal just to dispense with the old wives' tales that she'd grown up with and just, offer the Tampax brochure. That was sort of a big step in her generation. For myself, I wanted to tell Aretha, well, there's this physical part, and then there's just feeling different. You're going to be feeling different through puberty. Sometimes you're just going to feel like you want to cry all day and that it's never going to go away. And other times you're going to just feel so sensitive to special things or just incredibly happy or infatuated. I wanted to know, I never knew there was a feeling part. I just got the physical message. And I've told her that some young women like to mark the beginning of menstruation with some kind of ritual or moment or, whatever, but that not everybody does. I'm going to definitely leave it up to her, see what she says. I mean, many people have speculated, oh, well, she's going to hate sex. She's going to, she'll backlash against you and you'll be sorry. She'll rebel by refusing, Well, I don't know. I mean, I have to come back and tell you in a few more years, chapter 2. I've tried to, excuse me? Yeah, I don't know. It seems like hard to say. I mean, my little secret plan has been, we already have lots of fights, and there's already plenty of rebellion. I keep thinking if I'm not trying to control every little thing right now, maybe like that makes it a little easier. Do I get a break in a few years? I'm not sure. But she's already different from me, and I appreciate that about her, even though it shocks me sometimes. But I would have been afraid when I was her age to be as different from my mom, or I never argued with my mother about anything. I'm glad she's not afraid of me in that respect. Yeah. I'm sorry, I thought I saw your hand creeping out of your pocket. No. Yes. She was asking, I don't know if you all heard, what I think of movies in general and the rating system, and what I think of kids watching things that are, rated beyond what their age. Well, the ratings have nothing to do with context or aesthetics or social message or meaning or quality. I mean, to me, they're just a constant source of frustration. I mean, a classic example, again, using the famous F word that confounds America so much. If you use the word fuck in a movie and it means something, violent or angry as a swear word, fuck you, then it's PG. But if you use it in the literal Old English meaning of it, then the movie has to be rated R, because now it is really somehow even more disruptive. It's funny the kind of things you bring up as to what someone might be afraid for their child to see. I know that kids can be afraid of so many different things, and I wouldn't question a kid who felt, worried or apprehensive about any kind of, medium or visual that frightened them. I don't necessarily think that is going to be sex. It could be something else that is so compelling. My daughter's godmother took her to go see The Sixth Sense, and they both left because they said it was just way too scary because of the ghosts and the idea of something violent and cruel that had happened to someone in their afterlife. This is not a movie that, by the wildest stretch of the imagination, anyone would call pornography, but yet it's in their case, it was something that it just got too close and too frightening. I would rather know what movies are about and make some kind of informed decision and be able to talk about it with my child, whatever it might be. I'm actually not afraid of what so many people are afraid of. If my daughter saw a couple of naked people doing it on the internet or in a movie or whatever, I'm always sort of wondering, what do people think? Well, then what? And then what happens? They might have a sexual thought. They may have sex someday. Like what exactly is it that's going to be the end of the world? I find it easy to explain those kind of pictures. They're quite simple to say what's happening in them. I am much more tested when my daughter simply looks at the front page of the newspaper and there's some gruesome picture of, refugees fleeing the Taliban, and she says, what's going on here? What happened to them? What are those people doing to them? That's so much more complicated than saying, oh, they're having fellatio. I mean, it tries me to explain why people are so cruel, to explain prejudice, to explain exploitation. I mean, those are the things that are really tough. Describing various physical sexual acts or what they mean in the world of people that's a walk in the park by comparison. Yes?
Just staying on the movie theme, you did some work as a consultant in Bound.
Yes.
What you said earlier about the titillation in the mainstream media, I'm wondering, turn it around a little bit, I'm wondering, do you see anything out there that is sort of besides Bound, which is totally hot?
Oh.
Is there anything that you see that's sort of, I don't know, interesting or sexy or erotic, any movies or anything lately?
Well, I'll tell you a funny thing about Bound that also is connected with this ratings mix-up. When I was asked to be the sexual consultant on this movie, it's sort of a film noir crime caper movie about two lesbians who outwit the mob. And I choreographed the sex scenes, and I modeled them on some scenes from various movies and pictures that I'd been involved with before and I thought would translate very well. And I said, don't worry, I know how to do it without it being hardcore. It'll be easy. And one thing about this movie is the sense of two women who have to trust each other very quickly. They have to go very fast to a place of complete implicit trust. And I believed that we should see the Violet character seduce Corky and to be inside her. I said, this isn't one of those Vaseline on the lens, cunnilingus type lesbian episodes. We need to see Corky let down her guard and let Violet inside her. And the visual sign for this during their lovemaking was to see Violet's forearm moving, just this part. You saw her arm flexing and moving, and you realized it was between Corky's thighs. Of course, you didn't see exactly where her hand was, but it was implied. And then you saw Corky's belly trembling, and you knew she was coming. Just this flesh on her belly, wiggling in her breath. It was very, well, do you remember? It was very exciting. And when it went to the ratings board, they said, we cannot show that forearm because everyone's going to know what that means. Let's show Jennifer Tilly's tits instead. The greatest special effect in Hollywood, naked breasts. And that just enraged me. And I always am inviting my friends to come over to my house and see the unedited Canadian version, the European version, where you can see it as we originally shot it, which did not have the gratuitous topless shot, but had a much more of the reality that we were trying to create. Now, what did you just ask? I forgot the end of your question, though. What?
Recently, that looks better than a lot of the television stuff we're talking about.
Well, my awful secret is since I prepared for my tour, I'm completely out of the loop with new movies. I haven't seen anything. I haven't even had a chance to look at videos. I know that I got excited that some of the authors that I've worked with in Best American Erotica have been approached for options on some of their short stories. And the erotic literature that's happening in the US right now is fantastic. It's so varied and diverse and complex. And to finally see some of these, sort of erotica pioneers in the writing realm being approached for doing something in movies excites me a lot. I'd love to see some of those come to screen. I do see independent movies quite frequently that I think, well, here we go. What do we have to say here? I knew I mean, I don't even think I'm going to bother, although I guess professionally I'm required to go see Eyes Wide Shut. But I could tell from the marketing campaign that that was a con job. You know, I just knew right off the bat it's not an erotic film because they're playing that celebrity game about Tom and Nicole, you know. It was a turnoff immediately. I also feel like it's my requirement to go see this French film. What do they call it? Romance? Have any of you seen it? I'd be interested in what you think of it. Just because it's being heralded as a movie that approaches sex in a serious narrative way without a lot of kind of the titillation hoopla. And you know, for those of us who have been around, we all remember when Last Tango and Midnight Cowboy were coming out, and there was a sense in the mid to late 70s that you could make movies that would treat sex as a dramatic point in the movie without apologies, and that American cinema was going to be the better for it. Then that degenerated. Instead, X just became, you know, the low-budget blowjob caper, and the rest of the cinema started pulling back and doing the cliched scenes that, you know, are really so disappointing. So I'm actually going to rely on you. I asked this question in Boston, and a lot of people came up to me later and said, here's the movies that I believe. You know, here's the people who are doing things that are the wave of the future. Speaking of which, if you'd like to talk to me after this is over and I'm no longer in New York, I love to get email, and I like to reply, and I like to talk about the issues that I see on my website. It's susiebright.com. It's easy to remember. Or you can write me, Susie@susiebright.com, and I will get it, probably on the airplane to Denver, if you write me anytime soon. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is kind of a little bit of a film, but not quite. What do you think about the idea that especially on film and TV, that they find it so much easier to show, to accept violence, not just, you know, not just regular violence, but violence against women and all, but they have such a hard time in society showing a real sexual relationship and all types of sexual relationships.
Well, it opens, to talk about sex honestly in books and on screen opens a kind of a vein of discussion about who we think we are as men and women, and what our positions are in sex, a certain, that might not be, that might disturb the icons that have been set up so carefully. I don't always think that we approach violence so easily either. I mean, everyone says, oh, I'm so numb to violence, but like when violence really happens to you, to your body, does anyone feel numb to it? You know, when you get mugged, do you say, oh God, this happened last week? Just doesn't faze me at all, you know? Or someone in a family who's, you know, repeatedly slapped, does the next slap feel any less than, you know, the last one? So I don't, you know, there's no numbness to the real thing, either to real sexuality, to real violence. There's a tremendous anxiety about the possible connections between sex and violence. You know, is violence sexy sometimes? Well, yes, in the sense that anything can be sexy. We've been under this horrible misinformation that what is sexually pleasant or arousing is always lovely. And it isn't. Anything in life could be erotic, from the tragic to the melancholy to the brutal to the sweetest and most innocent. In fact, some of our most compelling erotic moments are when those two things coincide simultaneously. I think people are, there's so many reasons why don't people do it. They're afraid of what people think. They're afraid of the finger being pointed at them and saying, I saw the sex in your movie or your novel, and now I know all about you, and I have power over you. Because there's a sense of, it's like people, you'll read people who won't say their name or let their picture be taken because they believe their power will be taken away. It's like Samson, you'll cut off my hair. I'll tell you my sexual fantasy, and my cock will go away. It will, you'll have possession of it all. I've tried to be a living example that doesn't happen, that my sexuality and my privacy and my imagination and my unconscious have not been debilitated because I was open about sex.
Just something you mentioned there about do you think that if you give up control, that in a lot of ways you actually become a stronger person? That if you allow yourself to, let's say from a male point of view, you're the one who always has to do things. You're the one who, or you think that because that's the sort of stereotype you grow up with. The man does that, the man's in control. But if you give up that control, doesn't that really? Do you feel that makes you a stronger person?
Well, I've had 3 major life experiences with surrender and submission and, what that would do to me. I think as a child, growing up Catholic, I was tremendously moved by the idea that Christ died, that he was on that crucifix and he suffered. And, this notion that in this intense suffering and giving everything up, that you become more godlike, that you receive this remarkable power. And when I didn't want to do something, I would motivate myself that way, that if I could give it all up, if I could give up my pride, if I could give up my ego, I'll be able to do it. But that was also a very self-punishing motivation too, for some of the wrong reasons. Then later on, when I became writing about sex and politics and exploring my own fantasy life and my own little dark places that thrilled me privately, but I was quite disturbed about publicly, I found that when I just there was this very particular time when I just said to myself, I'm going to think anything I want and touch myself in any way I want while I'm thinking about this, without any break. I'm just going to let it go, and I'm going to observe what happens, but I'm not going to judge it. I'm just going to see what happens when you let it roll out, because I'd invested so much time in stuffing it, and as you know, the more you stuff it, the more it starts leaking out in strange ways. And that was an extremely worthy experiment, because the relief, the relaxation afterwards, the sense that I was not transformed into an evil sex pumpkin afterwards, that I had not been transformed by the bad sex fairy into an awful pervert who would destroy the world. I was still Susie afterwards, except I was Susie with a better understanding of myself. And then motherhood was another thing. I finally got that about sacrifice. I always thought sacrifice was something you did, and then you kind of said, well, I sacrificed, damn it, now what do I get? Or you resented it. You always had to resent it. And the idea of sacrificing because the love was so great, and it made you feel so much bigger just to do it. It recalled some of the erotic fantasies that I had had before, where I gave everything up, and I became so big because of it. It's an incredible feeling. Some people could make, and I could too, could make quite an argument for the opposite, that it can be just as liberating to have a feeling of being all-powerful, of being the one who controls everything, takes it all over, has all the say. subjects everyone else to their will. That can be quite, it's taboo, it's thrill. And then, it gets clinically or, sort of pathologically sometimes labeled as, well, untethered domination, the sadist, and so on. But we're just talking about this spectrum of control that you've brought up, and how genuinely illuminating it can be to explore those things in your mind, and sometimes with a consensual partner. I have to, just make a PS to this, that when I talk about this, I know there are always people who are like, well, Susie, I don't want to. I don't want to be tied up. I don't want to tie anybody else up. I don't want to be on the chandelier. And of course, I don't feel like, I don't even feel that mandate for myself, although these are pretty nice chandeliers, but no. I'm not interested in people feeling like I must try out this fantasy that is meaningless to me, or I must buy this sexual accessory that will somehow seems to be doing it for other people. What's the point in that? That's so frustrating. I'm much more interested in, the kinship I would feel with a celibate who felt like their sexual mind was free to go wherever they pleased. And that would be my best friend, rather than someone who had, done it with everyone and tried every plug-in appliance, but felt a great sense of frustration and secrecy despite their number of exploits. So, that's the difference to me. Yeah.
Do you observe certain generalizations or stereotypes of, let's say, people in their 30s or 40s today, of how they view sex, men and women, and are there important differences or distinctions? Remember one sex or the other?
Oh, I'm really glad you brought that up. She was talking about distinctions between men and women, particularly in their 30s and 40s. That your age range right now, my age range too. I wrote a bit about this in my book. I have a chapter called "Women and Children Worst," and I've given a lot of thought about this because so many people are eager to say these very distinct differences between men and women's sense of the erotic. And I'm often very quick to say we have a lot more in common. And there's some very dangerous cliches. For example, the stereotype that women are not attracted to anything sexually visual. Well, then why are we supposed to be so great at shopping? Like if we're not interested in what anything looks like, then, how do we manage to pick out our beautiful shoes? if that is an old tale that really depresses me. Or when they say men aren't interested in romance. Men aren't interested in the implicit or the subtle. There's so many men that feel completely frustrated and wounded by that generalization. And yet, it's true that in terms of the conventional sexist upbringing, we get some very different messages about sex. I mean, from the time little boys are babies and are praised for their penises, and given an idea that they should expect pleasure in life, that this is their due, that sex is not only about being a man and perhaps siring children someday, but that it is a part of your sexual masculinity that is you, that is valuable to you. Young women don't get that message. In the little chapter I was writing, I talked about I live in a town I'd never lived in before, and I took my daughter down to an art fair, and I didn't know what they meant by art fair. Well, it turned out to be all kinds of little cutesy animal pictures and refrigerator magnets with kittens going meow. Do you know what I'm talking about? And the kind of Disneyland teapots. And my daughter thought it was great. I mean, it was the Beanie Baby aesthetic for blocks. And she was like, oh, Mommy, it's so beautiful. I love it. I love it. I want this and I want that. And I was like, P.U. I was just so disgusted. Although I had to admit that when I was her age, I thought that was wonderful too. But this art fair wasn't pitched to 9-year-olds. It was pitched to adult women. And I thought how often a woman's taste is supposed to be infantile and like kind of mindlessly cheery and corny at all costs. And whereas men are encouraged to have a little bit more complicated and darker and more challenging tastes at an earlier age. Of course, many women come to that as they, take more risks or become more educated. But it's often, and sometimes it never happens at all. Witness the success of this horrible Beanie Baby art fair. But this is something I could talk even more about, like where we're coming to each other. But if I was doing a telethon, my message of hope would be that I think we have a lot more in common, and that there's so many people who completely and utterly reject the rules girls aesthetic, the notion that it's we're all in it for the cash and the status and, quid pro quo. I think people who are searching for genuine love and connection have found that, that is exactly the wrong path to proceed on. Well, I would like to, I'll take your question, but just before you do, afterwards, I'll say goodnight to you, and I'll meet you. I'm going to be sitting right outside the auditorium for a while. It'd be great to meet you personally, or sign your book, or talk a little bit more about anything you're interested in, but go ahead.
Well, I'm very interested in sort of mentioning about descriptiveness about sex.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, there's in the late 80s and whatever, there was a big motion, a big movement to make sure that women, lesbians particularly, were having good sex. And it seemed to be sort of prescribed.
Yes.
Many of the experts and turned out also, weren't always, they were bisexual. And I just always, I'm curious about whether the sort of Freudian model unconsciously slips into the idea of how women will be satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
With an end in sight, a goal-oriented kind of sexuality.
Well, often, I've been accused of the very thing you're bringing up, this sort of prescription, like Susie Bright, well, she's trying to make me be a lesbian, but I don't want to, or she's trying, now she's trying to make me be bisexual, well, I won't do that either, this kind of, and that's why it's become so important for me to accentuate the anti-prescription sexual movement. Yet I think there have been different times when I've bent the stick a bit to try and encourage, well, what would it be like to think of sex a little differently? Not because you should do this or should do that, but whatever happened to an experiment, even a thought experiment, if not an actual physical experiment? Why do we so often say no quickly to any new, possibility? It's as if sometimes I've felt like with sex, people, it's like they're sexually xenophobic. They won't leave their living room, they won't leave their hometown. You say, come on, it's just a block away and we'll come right back in a half an hour. And they're like, no, I won't go there. And so I've come on, 20 minutes, just 20 minutes down the street. Just a sense of, could we just open the door slightly without a sense of that we're going to lose ourselves completely, that we could have a genial attitude towards diversity or experimentation or towards a little bit of sexual adventure without feeling like we have to sign up for the world cruise and you're not getting back. Thank you very much for coming. I look forward to seeing you off the stage and out the door. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.